Pastor, when God cursed Cain, did he make him black? This was the question my parishioner decided to ask me, out loud, at potluck, in front of a dozen people, including the black matriarch of the church they were sitting by. I began to choke on the bite of food I had just placed in my mouth. I felt the ears of everyone in the fellowship hall slowly incline towards me. I groped around for my glass of water as my brain clawed for some kind of response to this horrifying situation. Where did she even come up with a question like this? The origin of Cain's curse and the color of skin has a monstrous history. Literally, there are monsters involved. It's also an issue that sparked my interest as a pastor and communications scholar in the intersection of monsters, religion, and popular culture. Today, in this first episode of my new podcast, I will tell you the tale of when a monster came to lunch and demonstrate why the study of the monstrous and religion is not only a valid area of academic inquiry, but also how it helps us to become better people, maybe even better people of faith. This episode is entitled A Monster Comes to Lunch. I'm Dr. Seth Pierce, and welcome to Beast and Bible. Some potlucks are luckier than others. Not only do potlucks require a delicate dance between delightful and diabolical delicacies, but even if you manage to fill your plate with the right kind of food, the potential for danger still lurks. The question asked that day confirmed the fact that it's not just the food at a potluck that can cause indigestion. In my pastoral training, I had been taught to answer Bible questions related to the afterlife, the second coming, and religious liberty. I had not been prepared to handle openly racist questions while dining on pasta salad and cheesy potato casserole. I had no framework to draw on, so all I could do was answer this person with a series of adamant no's, absolutely not, no way. After lunch, I was haunted by her question, and as I began to study its origins, I learned the answer, which has to do with monsters. What follows is a condensed history for the sake of time, but you can read a more detailed one in David M. Goldberg's Black and Slave, The Origin and History of the Curse of Cain. Before we begin, I want to give a content warning. Many of the quotes you're about to hear deal with race and disability, and, quite frankly, the quotes are really, really awful. They're terrible and offensive. We look at them because they are part of history, not because they are good. I should also mention the term monster or monstrous, as it appears throughout this history, can mean a lot of different things. Usually it is a blend of the fantastic with races or bodies that are different from the accepted norm of the time. Okay, so let's get to the history. In the 5th century BC, the Greek historian Herodotus describes fantastic or monstrous beings living in Africa. In the 1st century, Roman author and naturalist philosopher Pliny the Elder chronicles places like Ethiopia as, quote, teeming with marvels, end quote. For those wondering what an etymologia is, it was essentially an encyclopedia of knowledge that covered a wide range of subjects and was considered the most popular textbook of the Middle Ages. But it's not until Augustine's City of God where we get a formal speculation by a well-known Christian thinker and theologian on the so-called, quote, monstrous races, end quote. For Augustine, all natural processes are under God's control, and therefore it is impossible for mistakes to occur. So, when someone is born with a disability, deformity, or a difference from those speculating, it is not contrary to the will of God. Augustine tries to answer two key questions. The first has to do with whether or not these so-called monster races are human. After listing off several fantastical reports of cyclops, people without mouths, people without heads, and creatures with 2 feet but only 1 leg, who lay on their backs and shade themselves with said feet in hot weather, they're known as sciapods if you're interested, he says this, quote, but supposing they are men of whom these marvels are recorded, what if God has seen fit to create some races in this way, that we might not suppose that the monstrous burrs which appear among ourselves are the failures of that wisdom, whereby he fashions the human nature as we speak of the failure of a less than perfect workman? End quote. Augustine concludes, quote, "It ought not to seem absurd to us that as in individual races there are monstrous births, so in the whole race there are monstrous races," end quote. In other words, because Augustine believed that all creation was according to God's design, and he observed human beings that were born with deformities or disabilities, it wasn't a stretch for him to think there could be entire groups of human beings that all had the same anomalies, like a race of cyclops or people with hooves for feet. The second question for Augustine is whether these, quote, certain monstrous races, end quote, come from Noah's sons or from Adam. He concludes that, quote, "Whoever is born anywhere as a human being, that is, as a rational mortal creature, however strange he may appear to our senses in bodily form or color or motion or utterance or in any faculty, part or quality of his nature whatsoever, let no true believer have any doubt that such an individual is descended from the one man who was first created," end quote. Basically, for Augustine, fantastical reports about monster races should be taken with a grain of salt, and every human being, whatever their differences, descends from Adam. The term monstrous has more to do with being different than being evil. Yet, in the 8th century, the Irish Reference Bible, an anonymous Latin commentary on the Bible, quotes Augustine and names both Cain and Ham in its commentary as the, quote, progenitors of monsters, end quote. Basically, all monsters could find their origin in Ham and Cain. In this commentary, Ham married into the line of Cain and obtained dark skin. Keep in mind that the curse attributed to Ham by preachers and theologians and people making these speculations is actually applied to Canaan in Genesis 9, and in Genesis 9 there is no such thing as a curse of Ham. Later, the Vienna Genesis, a German paraphrase of Genesis dating from the 11th or 12th century, builds on Augustine. The Vienna Genesis states that the descendants of Cain, quote, completely lost their beautiful coloring. They became black and disgusting and unlike any people, end quote. Moving to the 11th century, the English poem Beowulf tells us that from Cain, quote, sprang misbegotten spirits, among them Grendel, and that out of Cain's curse there sprang ogres and elves and evil phantoms, end quote. Essentially, Cain is the father of monsters. In the 13th century, a forged letter attributed to St. Augustine falsely declares the Bishop of Hippo traveled to Ethiopia where he witnessed monster races, indirectly linking dark skin with the monstrous. For the sake of time, we skip ahead to the 1830s, and we look at how founding Mormon documents absorbed the idea of the Irish Reference Bible that Ham married into the monstrous line of Cain, thereby dooming them to remain slaves until the curse is lifted, which, in Mormonism, occurred in 1978 when the priesthood ban for black people was removed. Many more people besides Mormons accepted the curse of Ham or curse of Cain theories. They became part of the cultural or theological imagination of the time, but the Mormons were the ones who wrote it down as doctrine. In addition to the aforementioned monstrous works, the idea of this curse was reiterated by travel literature, theological speculation, misinformed preachers, and those in power who benefited from subjugating black people. The idea that Cain's curse was dark skin finds its origin in medieval Christian speculations on monsters that was repackaged by the Mormons in the 1830s, abandoned by Mormons in 1978, and yet somehow this monstrous theological recipe, patched together like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, jumped out at potluck to frighten people and cause me indigestion. So why bring up this theological horror story now? On July 5, 2021, Scientific American published a piece entitled "Denial of Evolution is a Form of White Supremacy." The article discussed the history of Christian art's tendency to whitewash its depiction of biblical characters who would have had darker skin. The author, Allison Hopper, asserts that, quote, in literal interpretations of the Christian Bible, white skin was created in God's image. Dark skin has a different, more problematic origin. As the biblical story goes, the curse or mark of Cain for killing his brother was a darkening of his descendant's skin, end quote. While it's certainly right to critique whitewashed biblical art and to condemn the idea put forth by some Christians that assert God cursed Cain or Ham with dark skin, it is extremely negligent to suggest the Bible actually teaches such a doctrine. It would be more accurate to say some racist theologians read their prejudice into the text, rather than suggesting there are texts that teach dark skin as a curse. However, it isn't just contemporary secular sources bringing up this scary old idea. This year, the Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath School lesson unintentionally conjured up the ghost of Cain's curse. While the April 13th lesson, entitled The Punishment of Cain, does a beautiful job informing readers that we don't actually know what the mark of Cain is, April 24th's lesson is entitled The Curse of Ham. The lesson doesn't dwell on the ancient monstrous theory, but it does make the important statement, quote, "Of course, it is a gross theological mistake and an ethical crime to use this text to justify racist theories against anyone," end quote. However, this statement is lost due to the use of a title that has its origins in the minds of racist theologians crafting real-life horror stories. Theologically and biblically speaking, the curse of sin is what moved Cain to murder his brother, Ham to shame his father, and disciples in all ages to debate who is in and who is out and who is superior. Sin causes irresponsible exegetes to stitch together and bring to life theologies that demonize others and keep themselves in power, and it causes us to be nasty to those we see as different from us. Theologians Natasha L. Mickles and Joseph P. Laycock point out that, quote, "Monsters have social consequences," end quote. The moment we place monstrous labels on people, we create realities that bless their mistreatment. This highlights a fundamental lesson that emerges from studying the history of monsters and religion. Those who are willing to make monsters out of others simply because they are different become monsters themselves. We would do well to remember the words of Jesus in John 7:24, "Stop judging by mere appearances and make right judgments." So, if you are ever at a potluck, or anywhere else for that matter, and someone asks you a question related to Cain's curse and the color of his skin, ask them first where they got that idea in the first place. Maybe they read it in a magazine, or got something in an email, or even read it in their Bible study lesson, and they're confused. Resist the urge to commit fundamental attribution error, the practice of assigning internal motives based on external actions without actually knowing why someone is doing something, and then we assume the worst about them. Take time to walk them through the history of this horrible racist idea, so they can be educated, and they can educate other people. But if they are asking because they want to justify a racist idea, or just be a troll, then remind them that God has never cursed anyone with black skin. The only time God curses someone in a way that changes their skin color is when he gives them leprosy, such as in the story of when God confronts Aaron and Miriam for their racist attitudes towards Moses' Ethiopian wife, Zipporah. You can read about that in Numbers 12:10. What does leprosy do according to texts like 2 Kings 5:7? It makes your skin white. In any case, you should be able to give a far better answer than I did on that day a monster came to lunch. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this first episode and will join me for more as we delve deeper into the intersection of monstrous faith and popular culture. In the next 3 episodes, I lay important groundwork and share some tools for how we might think about the scary or tricky subjects we have planned this season. Then, starting in episode 5, I will be joined by guests who will share their unique perspectives and expertise. For now, I look forward to you joining me next time when we will look at how to hunt for monsters without becoming monstrous ourselves.
An Adventist Learning Community Podcast.